206.
Mic check, mic check.
Salutations.
1112 12.
Yo, what's up, world? Welcome to another episode of the 206. Today we are joined with we are joined with a special guest, my old professor, Professor Howard. He's going to join us today to talk about politics. Now, we know politics is a very polarizing issue. It's at the forefront of many people's minds currently for very obvious reasons. So we thought we'll just try to have an elevated dialogue about it. In the beginning, we're just going to kind of give you guys our experience, like our background surrounding politics growing up. And then we're going to kind of transition to more of our political perspectives, our ideological views in regard to the subject. With that being said, I can go ahead and pass the rock over to Tim and let him get started with his background and experience.
Excuse me. Yo. Peoples, welcome back to the 206. I thank you for coming in and listening. Salutations, as my coworker Jason always says, from the state where the sun never quits. Like my co-host Armand says, today we're going to float around the cloud of politics as it relates to our lives, thoughts, and feels. Before we take that dip, 206 sends its prayers, thoughts, and all of our love to all those affected by the pandemic and every other challenge that 2020 has presented us this year. All right, so politics. My life as it relates to politics is a funny thing. I'm going to characterize my journey, especially through my teens and 20s, as it relates to politics, as very uninformed. I was very oblivious. I spent my days balling, hanging out with friends, video gaming, working a little bit, but for the most part, I really didn't pay attention to politics. I really didn't watch the news until roughly whatever year, maybe it was 2008, where Barack was running. It was somewhere around there where two events in my neighborhood popped up where it kind of made me more conscious of politics just in general or aspects of it. But yeah, it's weird because I've always felt like I understood politics a little bit, just a teeny bit, from my own deep sense of morality. It was like as if, there is not any, in school, I know we learn politics in school. There is no way I didn't pay attention to politics back in school. No. And sometimes my grandparents were watching it, it was on passerby, in and out and stuff. But for the most part, I was just looking back. It's just amazing how much I did not pay attention to it. Think back in middle school when September 11th happened. That might have been my first time where I've consciously made an effort after school, because I think I actually got picked up early. Yeah, my mom picked me up really early from school. It was surprising. It was surprising. I didn't expect. Yeah, well, I didn't expect to get picked up. I didn't realize the scope of what was going on. My parents were, totally, continue going towards an event or a planned event or whatnot, even if asteroids were raining down. But I got picked up early, and I remember going home and flipping on the TV and checking things out. I vaguely remember, no airplanes being in the air or whatnot, but that was it. It didn't go much further than that. But after that, there's really three. Let me just go ahead and just share the three events. One of them was around the time of Barack's first, race to the White House. I don't remember exactly what I was doing at the time. I was coming in from an errand, helping my mom bring in the bags from a grocery run, or I was inside the house, just coming out for a breath of fresh air, which is something I always did. But one of my family members was like, hey, there's a sign. Don't mind the sign, Tim. Don't mind the sign. And I'm like, what? And I looked, and there was, this neighborhood is very peaceful. No, nothing, no conflict, no nothing. It was just peaceful dead, what I'm saying? And at the most, my interactions with my neighbors was mm, you know, wave of the hand, sharing pie with them every so often. My grandmother would bake stuff, and I would, bring the pie over there, be neighborly. But this is the day where on just the outer edge of my lawn, of my neighbors, there was a wooden sign facing our direction. Excuse me. This sign, okay, which was at a perfect angle facing my walkway where anyone parking and walking in and out of my house can see, had a list, bulletins. I think it was like a bullet, a list of racial and ignorant slurs like get up and go get a job or stop being lazy and just several other ones. And these jokers managed to put like a lawn walkway light right in front of it, illuminating the sign so that when at night, what I'm saying, it was in full view and anyone could read it. And it
Yeah,
was
you gonna see
surprising.
this message, boy.
Yeah, it was just shocking to me because there was no other interaction between me and my neighbors other than just friendly. Hi, how you doing? Good day, isn't it? And I just thought that was amazing. Around that same time, maybe Halloween time, they also had like a dummy, a rope, and they had a big oak tree in their front yard. Um, they had a rope in this black dummy made out of, I don't know what it was made out of, hanging from one of the branches facing our direction. It had, for eyes, it had these glowing orange eyes. But the dummy was just dark. It was black. And again, this was around the time of the race. And think shortly after that sign, they had placed the sign up. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, like, are they really just, being that forward with their political expressions? You know what I'm saying? It was the first time for me that something like this could be that serious or mean that much, or they think this much about it. And it left me uncomfortable, and very wary of my neighbors as it relates to that. These incidents had me thinking of politics a little bit more. But what's significant about that is it was the first time, that was around the first time my rosy optimism I've carried most of my life to adults in general just faded. It was like, okay, you know, I didn't know adults can act like this. You know what I'm saying? Adults supposed to be acting mature and stuff like that. They want to act like this. So the third incident was obviously the election, Barack's being elected for president for the first time. I was crying, up to that point. My grandparents every now and then would tell me of what life was like for them growing up, segregation times. And I knew a little bit from my personal experiences catching movies or playing video games, a little bit about what politics was like. And then I have my own personal narratives regarding prejudice and racism. So surprisingly, I cried a lot, when Barack was elected. And where at first I didn't really know where it come from, I in retrospect, I understood that it would have had to come from what little I understood in that respect. But for the most part, afterwards, I would come in every now and then on MSNBC, the media outlets like that, to see what was going on, and I didn't stay on too long and just continued on in my life. Katrina, was another moment where I probably paid attention to media outlets as it relates to government help, you know. But other than that, mainly oblivious. It wasn't until the last 5 years, that I really watch politics, read up political articles, and got a lot more conscious.
True that. And just for clarification, I know you probably mentioned it, but just want to be clear. When you saw that dummy hanging from your tree, that was during Barack Obama's election.
It had to be around that time. I don't remember exactly. It was one of those Halloweens. Possibly might have been the year after, but I'm not entirely sure. But it was around that. It was definitely
Oh
after the
no,
sign
bro!
incident.
You're reading into it too much. If it was Halloween, it was just an innocent decoration, bro. Well,
Yeah, right.
True that. I guess I'll go ahead and go next. And sorry, audience, for fumbling there in the intro. I have to remind myself not to have my phone next to me so it's not distracting me when when the podcast starts. But anyways, for me, I'm going to do something that I don't often do on the podcast, and that's be brief. I don't have too many experiences surrounding politics growing up. I had a unique political perspective that I will share in the second half of this episode. But as far as the experiences are concerned, the only thing of significance I will say is the election of Barack Obama. And in case it's not glaringly obvious to those who don't already know us, me and Tim are black. So as a young black male growing up, all the mostly overwhelmingly the overwhelming majority of positions of like leadership and like prominent figures in history are all white men. So, and you notice this, right? It varies upon each individual how much you really internalize it and what conclusions you draw from it, but you're aware of it and you kind of like know from an early age, like, okay, like, white men have pretty much shaped this society, right? So, as a 15-year-old kid, it's kind of funny because sometimes when I hear certain people say like, oh, like again, I couldn't vote for Obama first election because I was 15 years old, right? But let's say I was 18, I 100% would have voted for him just because he's black. Because people say all the time like, oh, would you vote for Obama just because he's black? And it's like, yes, 100% yes, right? It's obviously you have to have a certain level of competence. I'm not just going to vote for him because he's black. If he was like a maniac, right? Or if he's like, if I, from my own perspective, if I saw him and like judged his character and I thought he was genuinely so drastically different from another candidate, then correct, I wouldn't vote for him, right? But if I'm going to be a 15-year-old kid, I'm going to look at him, I'm going to look at the other candidates, and I'm like, okay, well, from my personal perspective, leaving politics out of it, he seems like a genuine, like, from what I know, because at the end of the day, we don't really know these people. That's something I also will talk about in the ideological thing. I don't know Barack Obama. I don't know any president that I have. I don't know any politician. I've never met them. I can't truly, in an honest sense, vouch for their character. I can only rely on the information that's given to me from the media, whether it's mainstream or otherwise, right? So from my perspective, from the best of my knowledge, he seemed like a genuine person, a competent person. He seemed qualified for the position. And because he met those benchmarks and he was black, okay, yes, I'm voting for you. Because it's like it's more than just a political thing for me at that point. It's like black people have been subjugated and oppressed since the beginning of time in regard to America, as far as America is concerned. And the fact that there's a black man that can be, and that's, to me, it's not even so much, oh, this position of power, but the black man can reach the position of presidency. I think it has a greater effect than just a political one. And like I said, since he seemed he was competent and like there's no drastic difference from him and anyone else when it comes to political stuff, like, yeah, I'm going to vote for him. So for me, that was my only real experience growing up, seeing the his rise and his campaign and the movement that it started, and me just feeling like, okay, wow, like, okay, there's going to be, and it's funny too, because like obviously it's like all black people know the one drop rule, right? You one drop in you, then you're black, because back in the old times when it came to back like during Jim Crow or times before that, if you had one drop of black in you, you were considered black by white people. So now it's kind of like if you have that one drop, you're considered black. So even though he was only half black, I'm like, wow, it's great. Like there's a black person like who holds the office of president, and as a black male, that's just like, okay, like it means something to me. So that's really my only experience in regard to my background. Like that's the only thing I really remember. Again, aside from my own unique political views, which I'll get into later, like that was my own like experience of like thinking about politics, being involved in it. I say being involved because like, I would watch news, I would watch TV, I would read a news article. Like I was actually invested in the process, or at least invested in like knowing what's happening surrounding his election. And just remember, like, talking to other people about it, like the sense of community that was fostered by people of color, because there was another person of color who was running for office and was eventually elected. So my experience with that is the only real experience I have with politics growing up. So yeah, with that being said, I'll pass the rock over to Jason and he can share whatever he has on his mind.
Yeah, check. Appreciate you guys being here in the group in the circle here talking politics. Curious times we're living in always, and the political arena, like many of the other arenas of life, they're in major shifts and changes. So with that being said, we just concluded a presidential election, general election here in 2020 November, and this will date back. I want to say it's 1992 when I want to say the presidential election was maybe Bill Clinton and George H. Bush, if I'm not mistaken. But what I remember about that in particular was my parents were volunteers to be the hosts of the polling center for the neighborhood. And what it meant essentially was a lot of folks were coming in before work, say that whatever the work time is, 8 o'clock. I remember just being a kid, less than 10, and kind of seeing all these neighbors come over in the garage. And they had set it up. My parents were part of, whatever particularities needed to happen for that to be a legitimate place where folks could cast ballots. And anyway, I don't know if it was like you dropped your ballot off over there. If there's even a space to, do a little research, fill out the ballot. I can't recall the specifics of how it went, but I do remember a lot of people coming over. I also remember it was very, very kind of like friendly. Like neighbors were coming, people were chatting, kind of just hanging out a little bit. Even some folks would come and go, just like drop cast a ballot and leave. But I definitely remember a lot of people kind of hanging out. I remember coffee and donuts being served, and I remember all of this because of the coffee and the donuts, because I was trying to get that. I had no interest in seeing it. I was just like, man, how do I get these donuts? Not even a coffee at the time. So I was like biding my time. And in the process, I was paying attention a little bit to what was going on. So I recall that time, and I remember even like conversations people were having to some small degree about. I thought JFK, President John Kennedy, and some conversations around that, and it was like people saying where they were or something. Oh, when JFK was assassinated, this was meant this, and so I recall like just it was very active and very kind of it seemed like it seemed like a very adult thing to be aware of. Um, so as time went on, I recall those things, general elections between 2 and 4 years, kind of like politics was something like that to me. I don't recall the day to day happenings of government ever until um, I think maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor of California. And then he started to realize, like, oh yeah, there's um, these political offices. There's actually certain things that folks have to do if they're entering into these offices. So started to learn more from the national first thing about politics at a national level, then the state level, and little by little started to get a little more insight into politics was really it's so much of the fabric of America, although it wasn't necessarily spoken on and still isn't necessarily. I think the talking points and partisan politics, I think, are highlighted
Trash.
uh, like a sport. It's almost like a sporting event. But as far as politics, particularly decision making and law making and representation and making your voice heard, all that kind of stuff, it didn't even cross my consciousness until much later in my life that we can have political activism can have profound effects on transforming a neighborhood for sure at the local level, and who knows as far as propositions, etc. So that brings me to my political voting career, in which when I became a legal citizen to vote, my dad also is quite, he takes it a certain responsibility with voting. So we would read all the propositions for the state of California, the things that affected the state at large, but also our particular community. Again, commonly they were the general elections, so they were coupled with other aspects that included partisan politics. My parents had never identified with a political party. They're nonpartisan, not so no affiliation, not independent. Um, they are nonpartisan. So what it means is
Non-party affiliate. I think that's official. Like if you're voting and you're not a part of any party, it just says no party affiliation on your card.
no party affiliation. Yeah, so you're free to vote in any capacity. So my parents always shared that they were non-affiliated. They made it clear to us that's how they chose to look at their involvement with politics in general. Um, and I think we'll get into a little more of the system at how the system is in the United States of America is it creates peculiar ways, it seems, in a way, to how voting goes down, and again, what the political narratives are in our nation. So anyway, all those things went by, like being raised a little bit. My dad was making sure we were kind of going over the ballots, reading through the propositions. We would consult with people we knew. If it was a proposition around education, we had people who we knew with education. We talked with them, get what do they know. Folks in medicine, we would check in with them, certain propositions, see what they felt about it. So it was really kind of cool, actually. We would reach out to folks, friends of ours, and kind of expand, an awareness for me on how I knew them. It was maybe the first time we would have some kind of political conversation, albeit it was relatively focused on just propositions that were literally on the ballot for that year, ballot measures that were needed to be voted on. So as far as just political discourse, it was contentious growing up in my family, like in extended family meeting gatherings, because of our family. My family has significantly ideological and political differences. Again, from the sort of sporting ways, like my team's better than your team kind of conversation. So it was always contentious around politics. So there was even years where family was like, "All right, we're all getting together, and politics are off limits." The conversation, and if you want to talk politics, you got to go to a certain part of the yard or something like that. And it's legit. People, like, especially some of the family, was just like, "No, we're not having it. I'm not interested in all that energy," because it was contentious energy. Like I said, it was like a banter of sorts. We're family, but it would get a little bit heavier than banter. It became
People started
again,
throwing hands.
yeah, almost. It definitely was like emotional and ideological hand throwing. You know what I'm saying? Like, in any case, so politics in a way was a little bit taboo from a emotional perspective. All that, then fast forward, some travel. I started to get a little bit of travel around different places in the world, and the folks I visited were highly interested. Not all countries, but many countries were very interested in the political scene of the United States of America, and even folks in different parts of the world who knew about local politics, state politics, and various things. It was really, like, really opened my eyes to realize, like, wow, like, here's folks all over the globe. They know way more about the system of government that I live in. I don't even know what they're saying. They're asking questions that I know nothing about. So it helped me kind of think about the impact of American politics. The world is watching in a certain way, certain people in particular, and then also my own interest in learning more about it. And so I started to study a little bit about politics, and I'll say it was around the time of Barack Obama's, before he was elected president. So many people that when I traveled in Europe, India, various other Middle East, they knew very much about the presidential election that was about a year away at that time with Barack Obama. And people were very curious. Maybe it was a year away, maybe it was 5 months or something. But a lot of energy, man. People talking about it like they were so interested. They were again they were anticipating it as if they were citizens. It was affecting their life, and although maybe not citizens of the United States, it's commonly known, or at least postulated, that the United States of America, how the United States of America has great impact on the world political sphere. So, depending on your nation and other dynamics, of course, some of these folks were genuinely thinking about how their particular country would change based off who was elected president of this nation. And it was really powerful to kind of witness that and see people with genuine, like, bated breath. Again, it really kind of charged my own political awakening to kind of start to think about it deeper. So, and then long and short, I ended up coming back into the United States of America and studying politics, international relations, so to speak, while in university. So, and that covered so many facets of politics, including psychology and local and international politics, elections, and things that politics in school, politics in the prison systems, politics in education. I mean, in religion, it was amazing. The history of political activism, the history of political philosophy, like Enlightenment period. I mean, it's so robust. There's so much I could, elaborate on when it comes to the study of politics. But at university, spent quite a bit of time looking at a variety of things, which I won't get into right now. Maybe I'll leave it alone for now, and maybe some of those things can come up later. But I'll pass it to our guest, Professor Howard. You
Quick,
want to jump in on it?
quick question before Howard goes, just for my own edification. Was it, because I thought in previous conversations with you personally, it was political science. Was it political science or international relations?
It was political science. The degree was brief. Thought I was going to study international relations because I was thinking about, in my international travels, how we can, get to know each other better and find common ground and communicate well. Whatever. I don't know what international relations include. I was thinking diplomacy or something. So I was headed toward international relations, but when I was going to university, the university I went to did not have international relations as a
Shout
study.
out Cal Berkeley.
Yeah, University of California, Berkeley at the time didn't have international relations as a degree. It had political science and a focus on international relations. So it was kind of like the focus of it, but it overall poli-sci degree. Yeah.
True that. All right, Professor Howard, our esteemed guest, the floor is yours.
Thank you, fellas. Once again, thank you for having me. As you have so well articulated, very, very important topic. I want to go all the way back to what Tim said about 9/11. And Tim, my mom, I remember watching planes hit the building that morning, and I was like, "Oh, Mom, that means I can't go to school, right?" My mom was like, "They're not hitting buildings in LA. Get your ass dressed and go to school."
I hear that exactly.
Oh my God.
So that's just a little glimpse at my mom, right? She didn't care about none of that, and it kind of takes me into my my first, like, really experience with politics. My parents are really apolitical. They didn't lean either Democrat nor Republican. If they did vote, I never knew that they voted as I was growing up. And I grew up in a house that was apolitical. And anytime they did mention politics, it was always a negative thing, right? They mentioned, like, they would talk about George H.W. Bush in the early 90s, or they would talk about Reagan and Reaganomics in the 80s, right? Which, like, disproportionately affected South Los Angeles, where my parents were raised. Excuse me, and their responses, police responses to the crack epidemic of the 80s, carrying into the early 90s. So when they did mention politics, it was always from that angle, and it was always like, this is how it harms us. It's never a help. It's never a tool for us to use. It's always a tool that's used against us. And so that was my like upbringing. My I remember my first political incident that I remember was the Monica Lewinsky scandal. I think it was '97, and that's
I did
because I was
not have sexual relations with that woman.
and I'll say that was more because I was in the sixth grade, and guys in the sixth grade, we all thought we knew sex, right? So everybody was like, "Oh, Bill Clinton, he's the president, he's doing this in the White House, that's crazy." But I was like, it was like a joke, right? My first recollection of just politics, and I didn't really know what that meant, and then PhD, I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew that he was lying, and they was on his behind about lying. Um, the next one I remember, and I remember it and I was interested, but it still wasn't explained to me. I tell students nowadays that they're lucky. Like Trump is entertaining. You may not like him, but at least he is in his own maniacal way. Right. He has you wanting to know more about politics. Like Bush v. Gore in 2000, there was the only time that a presidential election went to the Supreme Court, and I remember it dragging on, but I was 14, couldn't vote, didn't really know what it meant. But looking back on that, I'm like, that's a transcendent moment. Like people still talking about that 20 years later, and I remember it vaguely, but not with as much interest as I have now. But I will say that changed. So Bush v. Gore was 2000. 2003, I started really paying attention. Junior in high school, I was taking a government class, which just happened to be it was a graduation requirement. Class was boring, but it just so happens and I took government in the spring, and that just so happened to be the time we invaded Iraq. And so my government teacher would bring these Newsweek magazines, and so we were totally off track of what our government was how it was structured and all the other stuff we were supposed to be talking about. And we talked about the build up to the Iraq War, weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein, yada yada yada, all that stuff. And so from then on, because I was on the back end of high school, and then I started thinking about war. And then I should also mention, even though I was apolitical, my granddad lived with us pretty much my whole life, and he's apolitical also, but he's also militant. So if that makes sense. And he has a very not want to say negative, but he's very critical of the American government. So I used to start talking to him about war, and he used to start telling me stuff about because I'm like, can they say this and make us go to war? And he's like, well, they've done it before. I'm like, what you mean? So he started telling me the Vietnam War and then the Korean War, and then he started even talking about when we invaded. We sent specialized troops to Grenada and invaded that island. And he started telling me we use our military all over. And so I'm like, what? Wait, what? Right. So that was Iraq War was probably my introduction to me wanting to be super interested in politics. And then George W. Bush before Obama, because Bush like Trump, but in a more politically savvy way. He, let's say for lack of better words, he didn't follow the rules, right? He had scandal after scandal after scandal. And so I was just like, this is government and this is criminal. And, we are torturing people, but they're calling it enhanced interrogation. And we're arresting people. And we're keeping them, we're not allowing, sorry guys.
It's so juicy.
And we're arresting people for an indefinite amount of time. And what are these enemy combatants? So all these things were, because we are using our government to do those things, they were legal, even though they're actually criminal acts in the international court, right? So George W. Bush was when I started really paying attention all the time to politics, day in, day out, because every day was, is it Paul O'Neill? Was it, how our and then we got to the end with the recession and the housing bubble bursting, and how all these things were that they were doing were legal because of the rollback of regulations that was implemented by government. And so I began to see government and politics as a tool and how these things are done. So that's pretty much like my political background. Um, and I say it precedes Obama. I I acknowledge Obama, but I was already into it before Obama. But I do remember my senior year of college. That was everybody's like great awakening was Obama, 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 Obama. And for me, it was it was different, but I still had that critique and that critical lens that I was viewing government through that I had been instilled with. So even though I saw Obama, when I listened to him and when I listened to his words, he was very eloquent, but his substance was it was like it was without teeth, really. And I say it's without teeth because I had just watched 8 years of George W. Bush do some very harsh things, drone programs, enhanced interrogations, black sites around the world, all these things. And one of the first things Obama said as president was, we're not going to look backwards at those crimes. We're going to focus on the future. And I was like, man, if half the guys I know that were criminals, they would love that philosophy because every crime that I've committed is in the past. And if we're never going to look backwards, and we're only going to look forwards, I mean, that would be great. And that was my perception of that privilege, looking out for privilege and using the tools of government to do that. So basically, like we're granting him immunity, even though he's done all these things, sent people to Iraq, not to mention Afghanistan, countless people killed, countless lives altered, and it like we can't do anything about it.
Do that. So, with that being said, you gave us a bit of your political background, like growing up and your experiences with it. So, if we can transition into the second part of this episode, which is kind of getting into all of our political perspectives, our ideological disposition in regard to politics. I know that we're all pretty similar, but again, this is in an echo chamber. We're not all the exact same. So we can kind of segue into a conversation about that. But I think we can segue into that. So with that being said, I mean, you can get up on your soapbox and kind of give us your overarching political perspective about politics in America and I guess by nature worldwide.
I mean, so for me, politics in America is a con game. And I say it's a con game because if you look at the history of our politics and our political system today, our two-party system, first of all, I would question, is that authentic and true democracy? Second,
no,
right?
I don't think. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement there. I'm sorry, the four of us, but continue.
So, and even with politics, we look at our landscape today. We've got Republicans, Democrats, and it's so contentious and so heated. And really, there's no difference in the two political parties. They both believe in war. And it's not like one party say, "Oh, we're peaceful," and other parties a warmonger. They're both war hawks. They're both pro big business. And it's so many issues in our society that they are politically aligned with, that the one or two things or the small things that they differentiate on, those are the things that get blown up, right? Small issues such as abortion and small government versus big government. And when I say that they're essentially the same thing, it's because some people say, like, well, I'm a conservative. Well, I believe in small government. Yeah, but you believe in the criminal justice system and a bloated military. That's not small government, right? That's a symptom of big government. And so it's that hypocrisy in where we say small government when it benefits me. I like smaller taxes and more states' rights and all these things when it benefits my agenda, right? But if we're talking about policing and federal resources for policing the criminal justice system, then all of a sudden, like, yeah, I'm okay with those billions of dollars getting spent. So you're not really for small government and you're not really for conservatism. You're just bending the lines to fit your ideology. And so when I say they are one and the same, if we look historically, and this is one of the reasons, like, I don't identify Democrat or Republican, maybe or even independent. But Democrats, what the party is today, if you fast forward 100 years ago, they were the white supremacists, they were the slaveholders, right? And so for me, when like I hear these, and my grandma gets mad at me all the time. I'm like, I don't know how she vote. I'm like, Granny, I don't know how you vote Democrat. I couldn't vote with somebody who used to own me as a person, and that's just me personally. And when I say the political system is one and the same, for Democrats to become Republicans and Republicans to become Democrats, to have that switch, and there was no new party that was created. There was no third party or an alternative, right? They like used to have Federalists, but Federalists don't exist anymore as they got phased out, right? So how come, if there wasn't a space for white supremacy anymore, Democrats, why didn't it transition into something new? So the fact that it's essentially the same party and it stayed within the same political framework, to me, signifies that it's not very different from what it was 100 years ago. It's just one is in your face type racial ideology of white supremacy, and another is a more subtle and more passive form of white supremacy. And that's the way I view Republicans and Democrats. It's just like you'd rather get shot 100 times or lethal injection. You're gonna die either way. It's just one is more peaceful, right? And I think a lot of I think also there's a lot of misconceptions about our democracy in general. We believe, and I say we, not it. I mean, I should say exclude myself. It's a belief that we have this American exceptionalism that when it comes to democracy, and if you really look at how many people vote, our voter turnout and the people that actually cast votes in our elections is middle of the pack at best when it comes to quote unquote advanced peer nations. And so other countries around the world have a much better idea of how to get people involved in the political spectrum and their vote in enacting their democracy. Here in America, that is not the case. And again, that goes back to history because that's never been the case. We've never been interested in getting as many people to vote as possible. And it's the reason, we have the electoral college is because the founding, quote unquote, founding fathers didn't trust the population to make the right decision when it came to selecting a representative or a leader. And therefore, there's that piece where Congress gets a say in who elects the next president. And if you remember, like that doesn't sound like a big deal today, but if you rewind, 2 centuries, Congress were all white males who were landowners who were over 21 years old. Not because those were the most articulate or the most intelligent people in society, but those are the ones who legally had the right to vote and legally had the right to participate in our system of government. And so from the outset, it's been a history of exclusion. And when people say, "Oh, well, like we've been voting for generations," like you might want to like scratch that because we haven't had full inclusivity. What 1965 maybe, in some places, and I'm talking about the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then you have some places around the country who didn't even really implement that because again, policies are only as good as their implementation. And so, I've had students who are like, "Oh, 1920, so 100 women have been voting for 100 years." I'm like, "Yeah, well, white women, but if you're a person of color, that didn't happen in 1920 for you, And so, those are just some of the things, and that still occur today. Voter suppression, voter purging. It's more subtle today. Get a real ID or have all your IDs match, or even still voting on Tuesday. Like, who is that convenient for? Right? Why not a voter holiday? Why not vote on weekends? Why not have an app? We have technologically, we as America is advanced. We don't put that type of resource. We don't put that type of funding into our election system and the machines that are a part of our election system. So we don't really put our money where our mouth is when it comes to democracy in numerous ways. And it goes back to me saying that politics is really a con game, and it's a sham. But the sad part is our life is political, right? You need coalitions. If you want to get something done to change the education system, you need politics. You want something economics, you need politics. Military, you need politics. Criminal justice reform. It's all political. And so our life is political, but our political system is structured in such a way that it disenfranchises a lot of people and it disinterests even more people than it disenfranchises. And even when you have something like, again, the electoral college, and trying to explain that to people and explaining how, somebody can, like, what kind of democracy is it where a person can lose by 3-4 million votes and still be president? What kind of democracy do we have when somebody is losing by 6 million votes and still say they can contest the results of an election, right? And we like, oh, and well, nothing's perfect. Well, these things are very fixable, right? We're talking about these things like they're abstract, like they weren't created by human beings. Like it's just some entity that was dropped on us. And well, we just have to work within the realms of the system. The system was created by people, which means that as people, we can change them. But again, there's not going to be that push for change because those interests of the masses are never going to align with the interests of those people in power. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, we're going to continue to have a political system that's based on exclusion and how many people are not going to vote and how we can put one voting machine in one county no matter what, even if in Texas where you have 5 million people in one county and 200 people in another county. Oh, this is one balloting or one ballot drop off for early voting. And you're like, how is that democracy? Right. And so that's just my base ideology overall when it comes to politics.
So I have a lot of questions, but before I get into asking any of them or also sharing my thoughts, I want to leave the floor open to Jason and Tim in case they had any initial feedback to anything you said.
I mean, what was it like this past week and maybe the past 2 weeks? I've understood more than ever in my personal life the importance of staying informed constantly. And really, I've only just now learned that the Electoral College is an actual group of people. I didn't know that. What I'm saying? And it boggled my mind to discover that 500 or so people have so much influence over thousands of other people. And I thought to myself, I'm like, it was already bad enough, what I'm saying, that I understood personally, the ineffectiveness as far as representation, as it just relates to the Congress. What I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's ineffective to represent so many people in one person, essentially, really. And I thought about it and I'm like, this is 2020. We have technology that could easily, optimize and streamline, our election system in terms of like information, sending out the proper information, but as well as just the voting and election process in general. We're not operating on telegraphs. This is, we're not pigeon carriers, or we're not operating by carriage anymore. Like, this is 2020. Right. We moved past beepers, the World Wide Web coming out in the 90s. I'm like, there has got to be a way to just have, and you know what I think of? The bank tellers, when you go in the bank and you see the little go through the pipe and stuff like that. I'm like, dude, like, yeah. I'm thinking that in terms of just information and vote, like, there has got to be a way, I'm saying, shit like this, but I just wanted to put that out there because I know you mentioned Electoral College, and election system. This is just something I'm just beginning to understand.
And just, I read an article not too long ago where it mentioned that if you live in Wyoming, right, your vote is like 4 times more valuable, like it's like 4 votes in the state. And it's like we're giving people, not to say anything bad about Wyoming, but that's that disproportionate like structure, like that disproportionate weight that's given. So what you're telling me is one vote each vote counts and my vote counts. But really, if I live in a certain place, my vote counts 4 times as much.
Exactly.
And like you said, like we're not changing the system because like why, right? Like and I think that's one of my biggest things is that things have
That
maintained the same, all because
status quo.
that's the way we used to do it,
You know what
right?
the funniest thing is? Before again, I have a couple questions I want to ask you, and I also want to get Jason's opinion on something. But I'll just leave this out there because it's something that I'll just leave out there for when I give my personal opinion later. But it's so funny because it's like if there's one thing, whether you're a conservative or a progressive, if you're a Republican or a Democrat or even an independent, right? There's like one thing that I think everyone can agree with. Nobody likes the system, and no one likes the politics. Yet we stay opposed because we I don't want to get too. We stay opposed and we stay with our party lines, our tribe, our team, and just try our best to get our team involved because we think if our team's in place, then we'll see the change we want to see in society, as opposed to trying to dismantle the system that none of us like altogether. But and I'll elaborate more on that point later. But I wanted to ask before I asked the question to Professor Howard, I wanted to ask Jason if he had any initial thoughts on what Professor Howard said, and also to pose this question, that being, how did your experience at Cal Berkeley and studying political science change your view of the political system, if at all?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate Professor Howard what you're saying, bringing context to it as well. Some history. Yeah, if we look at the history of our nation, where we're a nation built on uh, injustice, really, a nation built on taking advantage of people and being willing to use people to whatever end for a goal. That's our nation was built on that, and so similarly, so were our politics and our various documents and the various evolution that United States of America took on always included political agendas that were not inclusive. And in the end, it didn't matter who said what, it was going to be those who had, if you will, the political will or who created the system, those who created such tools and instruments. No one can influence that unless you also had tools of those same instruments. So just like Professor Howard was saying, voting rights, these are still issues. They're not necessarily being honored, to say the least, even in states where perhaps some of those things are they look different, or even counties it might look different. There's still a fundamental flaw in the system itself, and therefore it seems to me that when life becomes politicized in a flawed system, it's one thing that we're political by nature, say society is, and we're making decisions together. There's a social reality there. So, however, what it looks like could be so many different things. It need not be what we see currently. It need not be what we've seen in the past in this nation or any nation. It could look something similar to something we've seen. There's a variety of systems that give voice to more people, uh, that have little instruments more, um, how do you say, prepared to be active in the community, and then it would just be a matter of those individuals who are quote unquote in power. Would they agree to such a thing? So who knows what kind of changes and evolutionary changes need to happen for more of the voiceless of America, United States of America, to come to the table, be heard, and beyond that too. I think represent those voices can help represent demographics that have yet to be represented in any profound way in our nation. And again, there's been over the course of you know 300 plus years, there's been some profound at least from a historical perspective, centuries speaking, we can see some shift. However, we are definitely, it seems to me, within the capacity of human beings now, with the instruments we have, with technology we have, a lot of these barriers need not be there. So it seems to me that what we're missing is some aspect of education around it, and to understand it, and then to begin to start, I think, creating what seems to me maybe something grassroots, in that recognizing that perhaps our influence at a federal or national level, um, although we do what we can, it's really our circle of influence and our circle of concern. I think sometimes we have to look at separately. So sometimes I think with politics, to look at the circle of concern, it's overwhelming, because we're talking about maybe at least even a national impact. Circle of influence is like, well, what do I have? Well, I have a neighborhood, I have a community, I have local folks that we can influence a few of the things around here. What does that look like? So I think some of that's going to emerge a little more as this unfolds, as politics unfolds in the consciousness of more and more citizens of America, or people who can vote. Beyond that aspect of voting and the ideal hope of it, et cetera, et cetera, when looking at politics, when really studying it, my experience was, in looking at many systems all over the globe, we are, as a human race, we're in a profound shift toward coming together of some kind. And we don't have a system in place for such a coming together. So, United States of America itself is clearly, I think, part of the highlighting of the system is in somewhat connection with our diversity. That the diversity of the United States of America, because it's so diverse and because our politics are so not diverse, the stark sort of gap it creates from the reality of people in this nation versus the political uh, agenda. It's just so, the political agenda is left wanting, to say the least. We're not even really talking about well-being and the growth of community yet. We still bicker, if not all out war, about our differences of thoughts and ideas. So we have a lot of growth to do still, and it seems first it's going to be about listening to each other when we say opposing views coming together for a common purpose. I mean, we're going to need some mature people with different ideas to be able to communicate and think creatively together. And I'm not so sure we've seen that system yet, even in the world. I mean, there's all kinds of curious things with a parliament system, or even like an international body such as the European Union. And some of these things are also they have some qualities and characteristics that would be seemingly great for a nation like the United States of America with all its diversity. Yet they themselves can't, a parliament or even a federal body of nation states like the European Union. They're not the system yet, but it's similar, right? Our states is something like that, with a large government in a small government, some kind of interplay. There's a lot of things that are like that could be utilized. It seems though they need some significant alteration or tweaking, or however we want to, whatever the words would be. So, going back just briefly about the study of politics at the university was wonderful due to the passion of the professorial, the faculty, were they love what they did. So it made it fun to study politics, and we looked at a lot of different things. And one of the great things about it was all those different ideas in those conversations and in those breakout groups and in our different projects and assignments, was everyone coming together to study this stuff, share their ideas. Man, we're all at this university and within a classroom, and we're maybe, in a small group breakouts, like, I don't know, 20 people, 30 people, instead of like 400 people in a class, right? So, and in those 20 or 30 people, there's so many different ideas. And in a university, you could see that. Like, people were a little bit more sort of creative in their looking at this, studying this. So at some point, it gets almost, we get forced to kind of choose these two kind of narratives. One is choose this one or that one, and it's such a disservice to what is really going on, and it's also just a disservice to feeling like we have some potential influence here when it comes to how our society looks. So yeah, I'll just re-emphasize, our influence is minimal with the system we're in. It really is. It's very minimal. There's ways to increase our say political voice in activism, and at the same time, we're in need of some kind of major shifts. Which there are ideas, and there's thinkers, and there's writers, and folks who've studied this way more than me, and folks who've lived it way more purposefully than I have. So some of those things we might want to speak on, but I won't speak on them yet. I'll leave it at that for now.
Professor Howard, it sounded like you wanted to say something.
Well, I was going to say, just in terms of the university, in studying at a university, I think one of the issues has nothing to do with the university, but in our society, how many people have, even in today, how many people have a college degree? And I think one of the struggles, kind of what Jason was saying, one of the struggles is, how do you talk to the person with a high school diploma, or a AA degree, or somebody that's not at a Long Beach State, a Cal Berkeley, UCLA? How do you get those people involved and engaged? Because again, going back to Trump, what I noticed with the last 4 years, he's bringing out those people who may not be
They're disillusioned with the political process.
No, not even that, but they have an awareness, and they have an awareness of what Trump represents. It's the ability to critically think on my own, and the ability to decipher information and analyze information that particular, or a lot of his group, is missing. And so when he says something, for the educated, I'm pretty sure for you guys as well, when he says it, it's like, oh man, that's like, people really believe that. And then when he says it and they hear it, they're like, yeah, that's right. And it's that, I think it's tapping into that demographic that is going to be challenging, in a way.
Yeah, I'll ask one more question before I hop on my soapbox and give some of my beliefs, and that's, I pose it to Jason and Professor Howard because it's more of an academic thing when it comes to the vote. Because I won't try to re-articulate what you expressed to me in the past. I'll let you do it here for your own. But you talked about how you had certain views about the value behind people voting, and if not voting in mass actually has a stronger impact than voting in mass. So I guess I'll just pose that question about how much does voting actually matter? Because I know, Jason, in our personal conversations, you gave a perspective on voting matters in a certain way, but not necessarily in the way that people think it matters. Whichever one of you want to go first.
I'll just go. So I've expressed, and again, this is one of my lifelong. I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm constantly adjusting and thinking about how my decisions and my beliefs impact, and how applicable they are. So I've been vehemently opposed to voting. In the past, I don't believe voting, especially in Southern California, a state that's so blue that neither presidential candidate ever even comes to talk to the people of California. And so I've also taken the in the past, I've taken the position that those who abstain from the system have the most political power. And in my theory is based on right now, Black Americans vote Democratic by 90-some%. And with that being said, because the Democrats already know you're going to vote for them, they know they don't have to work for your vote. And the Republicans, because they already know you're not going to vote for them, are not trying to steal your vote. So you end up voting for a party that is not concerned with your struggles, not concerned with your issues, not concerned. And I say not concerned, right? And I say this, not to be callous or anything, but we needed Black Lives Matter when there was a Black president in office. Like that's when the movement started. We had a Black man in the White House, right? And so you have a political party that knows you're going to vote for them come hell or high water because you're not going to vote for the other guy. And the other guys aren't even trying to work for your vote. So like, it takes away your political power, your influence. Because if you look at election cycle after election cycle, those people who are sought after, who are giving their pitches and giving their political speeches to, it's those independent voters. Like right, this past election cycle, it was white working class people in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But they didn't come. But what about the Latinx community? And they're dealing with immigration and ICE and deportation and separation of families and involuntary sterilizations and all these things. Those issues weren't necessarily addressed in detail by either candidate because they didn't have to. We're not talking to those voters because so that's in the past has been my focus, and it still is my main political view. I would say with one caveat, for me now, I would say voting at the local level is important. I still am, the presidential thing is something I'm still against because I also don't think that what you put when we call it an election, it's really a selection. I get to pick one of the two, and me picking the lesser of two evils is not very moving or not very encouraging to me. But there were some things on the local level this past election, like bail reform, how public schools are funded. So those type of things at the local level can be beneficial. So I think more of an engagement there. But the problem with that is that we focus so much on the national election that who reads kind of like what I can't remember if it was Jason and Tim who was talking about the source of information, how it comes, right? Do I want to read a pamphlet that's 30 pages long, that's dry and full of language? And we got to remember, if I'm not college educated, am I really understanding what I'm reading? And if it says this is in the affirmative, then this is what, am I voting for it? Am I voting against it? And if I vote against it, does it mean it stays? If I vote for it, does it mean it goes away? Like, and all these things are that confusing element. So I think there's more importance at the local level. And I will say voter participation at that level is productive. But at the same time, that's the most confusing level. And so, I don't really have an answer for that right now.
So when you say, you abstaining to vote, because you said people who abstain from voting have the most power. Do you want to elaborate on that point? How does someone abstaining from voting have more power than someone who's going to cast their vote? Because
if I'm not going to vote, but you want to win the election, you want to come talk to me. What can I do to earn your vote, right? If I say, like say for black Americans, if that voter turnout for Black Americans is what's going to win you the election, but then all of a sudden Black Americans are like, well, we're going to sit this one out. We're not going to vote this year. All of a sudden you're like, holy crap, why not? What's going on? The criminal justice system. Like, I don't really like how you guys are handling it. And so then it becomes, well, if I'm elected, then we can start working on reforms and I know all these things are promises and politicians lie all the time, yada, yada, yada. But at least you have the politician's ear, right? And you have that power of having that conversation because your vote matters and they know your vote matters and your vote matters. But you just blindly giving your vote is not resulting in any type of positive results for Black people. And I'm speaking specifically for Black, but any people of color. And the reason I'm speaking on Black right now is because, given the history, slavery, all that stuff, even in 2020, when it comes to healthcare, economics, criminal justice system, politics, education, Black people are still at the bottom of the totem pole. And it's not because we are less intelligent or anything like that. We have a system in place, and we have policies in place that have placed these burdens on that demographic.
I thought it must be because we're less intelligent. I mean, we do live in a meritocracy, so I mean, obviously, if we're at the bottom, we're there for a reason.
And that's what that meritocracy thing is so useful, right?
Okay, and so what I hear from what you're saying is that not voting in mass has power within itself. If such a small portion of society doesn't vote, that it's okay, the system's still going to be the system. But if we unified and understood that we actually may have more power in not voting, that has more power than just upholding the status quo in the system.
Exactly. So if you think about how many, say people of color, Black and brown unite, how many millions of people is that, right? I think we have 22, 23 million Black people, and we have another 58, 59 million Latinx. Numbers for Black might be a little low, but Latinx. So let's just say that's 65 million people, right? They're eligible voters. Or let's just say it's 40 million or 20 million, whatever you want to say. Let's go, not everybody that's, registered voting age and all that stuff, right? So let's just say it's down to 15 million people out of those 60 million people of color. Well, Biden only won by 6 million votes. That's his margin, right? And so if you have a strong demographic of people who are I'm not even say abstaining, but if you were just independent, right? If you were just saying, I'm not Democrat or Republican, now come talk to me, right? That's a lot of influence, a lot of power in the system that people of color, by and large, don't persuade or don't pursue. And it's almost like we don't recognize we have that power because we're like, oh, the Republicans are just terrible, so I'm just going to vote Democrat no matter what. And again, we've been voting Democrat since FDR. And FDR is the same person who didn't include agriculture or domestic work in Social Security, right? So the two occupations that Black Americans were in the most at that time were not included in Social Security, right? And so we can see these little things, these little policies, politics, legislation that's harmed us over generations. And yet here we are in 2020 voting Democrat before I even know who the Democratic nominee is and what they stand for, he or she, or what they believe in. And I think that's the problem.
True. I know. I was gonna ask Jason. Jason, you want to go ahead? If not, if you don't want to, it's good because I am ready to kind of talk about some things. Yeah, I saw you unmute your mic, so I don't know if you're getting ready to say something or. Cool. I don't know. I don't know if we got bit by the techno bug again, but I'll go ahead and start talking. He should be fine though. Maybe he's having individual problems with his own mic, but I'll go ahead and I'll say this. So yeah, there's a lot that you guys said that I want to touch on, but I'll just start with something that I think is the most important, and I'll pose some rhetorical questions to the group, and you guys can answer it in your response to me or not. But so where do I really want to begin? Like most things in life, I think everything starts in the realm of thought, because that's really all it is. And oftentimes when we talk about politics, even like for you guys just said, grew up apolitical. I would say that I agree. I grew up extremely apolitical, but I wouldn't even say it's apolitical. I would change and say that we all grew up nonpartisan. Because not that we're not vested in politics, so we don't understand that essentially if you have a civilization, we have to be governed. We're governed in some form or fashion. So that's, governing public affairs. That is politics, right? So it's kind of, I think, a misnomer to say, oh, we're not we're apolitical. I would say we're nonpartisan. We don't follow this two-party ideology or subscribe to the contemporary idea that our current system is serving us and doing any benefit for anyone, I think it does benefit a very small portion of people. But for the vast overwhelming majority of society, even the people that are opposed to one another, I think it's equally not serving both people, either side of the aisle. So with that being said, definitely I was nonpartisan growing up. And for me, I don't even view politics as a thing. I think people see politics as a thing in itself when it's not, to me. Politics is just a representation of something deeper. Because if you think about it, even thinking about certain movements, we talked about women's suffrage movement. We talked about the civil acts movement. I mean, civil rights movement. To me, those aren't political movements. Those are ideological movements. And politics is the vessel. Politics is the means by which we change things. Because again, we live in this society where politics govern our affairs, right? But at the root, at the foundation of it all, they're just changes in morals, changes in values, changes in thoughts. And to me, that's where I always like to stick. It's just excuse me. It's just I just had the biggest brain fire in my life. A thought experiment. Everything in life is truly just a thought experiment. Everything starts in the realm of thought. Like even if you just walk and you see a building up, a skyscraper, right? That skyscraper is there, and it's a result and a manifestation of a few things, right? It's a manifestation of people learning how to be engineers and how to build buildings that don't blow over the wind. And it's also a representation of this big skyscraper is here for a reason. It's representative of something of our economic beliefs, because this building's here because there's some corporation that's there, and we believe in having corporations. That's why they exist. So, like, if you just go down to it, everything is a representation of our current beliefs and ideologies of the world. So when it comes to politics, that's why I always like to start a conversation at the base of it, at the root, at the foundation of it all. And when we get into contemporary political discussions, honestly, if we're not having a conversation about revolution, if we're not having a conversation about dismantling the system altogether and making a new one, building and creating a new one that serves everyone, then to me, we're not having a conversation about anything. Because if we're having a conversation about Democrats versus Republicans and yada, back and forth, we're not doing anything but perpetuating the system into the future. And I don't want to have a conversation about that because, again, I don't think the system is serving us whatsoever. So to me, I first start with, again, the biggest problem I think is dismantling this concept that we think parties serve us and that there is a true difference in the parties. Because as you said, throughout time, the parties flip flop and, they just change places. Okay, now we believe this, now we believe that. And ultimately, there are differences, like, smaller differences, but on a large scale, again, yeah, the similarities there are more similarities than there are differences. And for me, if we continue to have this two-party system, that all it does is divide us, breeds contention, animosity, and strife between the citizens of America. We're not going anywhere because we already know that the current human condition is very susceptible to tribalistic tendencies and the us versus them mentality, and this is my team and that's that team, if you're not for us, you're against us type thing, and that's not serving us whatsoever. And so long as we treat politics in that manner and we behave the way we've been behaving in regard to it, you won't see any. You'll see, the proof is in the pudding. You'll get what you currently get, what we currently have. You have millions of people who are, you'll get what we currently have. I don't need to describe what we currently have. We're all aware of it. We're all living it, and we're all seeing it. Both sides, the two main sides, no one's really happy. One side is like, we think that this person should be here. The other side is completely crazy. The other side is like, how did this other side even get in here? They're completely crazy. And so again, when I say that, I'm not ignorant to some of the realities of what's happening in each party. I have a brain. I'm capable of deductive reasoning, and I have perception and insight. So I would be disingenuous if I was to say at one point or another, I may not be more leaning with the sentiment of one party more than the other, or that I clearly can't see things that I don't, that I clearly see things that I disagree with that one party may be doing or one person may be doing that the other one is ostensibly not. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's kind of irrelevant because what's worse than any of those things is the system that created those things. And I want to do away with that altogether so that never again do we have someone in power, regardless of whatever, political affiliation is attached to them, can represent ideals and values and beliefs that I don't have, or that I think most people don't have. So I'll just say this, and because oftentimes people, when you have people say, "Oh, let's dismantle the system," like, "Oh, well, what are we gonna have? What can we do?" I think that's often kind of, I think that's like a fallacy a fallacy of thought in the way you think. Like, just because in the current moment we may not have an already well established system ready to go to take the place of the current broken one, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working to dismantle the broken one. Because if we recognize the broken one is broken and it's destructive and it's not serving any higher purpose, then we should work as much as we can to dismantle it. And at the same time, if we are unified, we can come together and create a new system. Just like this system was created, a new one can be created, as one of you guys were saying earlier. So I'll just go ahead and share. In the last, probably at the time of you listening to this episode, 100% we would have released the spirituality and religion episode finally after like 4 tries at it. And in that episode, I talk a lot about independent investigation of the truth, which again, to me, if you have truly independent investigation of the truth, you're not going to fall victim to this farce of a 2-party system and subscribe to one. You wouldn't identify with either party. To me personally, truly, I think it doesn't, again, as for the 15th time, it doesn't benefit anyone. To me, that's the biggest problem, that we see ourselves as Republicans, or we see ourselves as Democrats, or we see ourselves as liberals, or we see ourselves as conservatives. Why must you have that attachment to you in order to cast a vote or to put someone in office? Again, it's the system that we currently have that makes you think you have to have one of those titles to then vote the people that are part of your party in, because they ostensibly represent those values, when in actuality,
Armand,
that's not. Go ahead,
can I
cut
say
me off.
something on that right there?
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No,
I found it
okay.
and exactly what you were just saying. We talk about, we think of one party versus the other. The crazy part is the leaders of the party don't even look at it like that, right? They're like, if you and your neighbor, if me and my neighbor, if they're a Democrat and I'm Republican or whatever, vice versa, we'll be fighting across. We're fighting all day. We're throwing stuff in each other's backyards, and then the people who are creating this ideological rift in Washington, they are on the Senate floor, yada yada yada, and they go to lunch together because they're friends, right? It's kind of like I was Cindy McCain, who had a political ad for Joe Biden, and she was talking about her husband. My husband John and Joe were fierce competitors on the Senate floor, and they would go to lunch together at least 3-4 times a week. And I'm like, well, they're friends, right? And while we have people in our society who take those differences to heart and we're arch enemies and really like physical violence, the people who are creating these ideological differences, again, it's a game, right? And it's not even that serious to them. It's for their own political survival. But at the end of the day, it's nothing personal. It's the people that internalize that difference and exacerbate those differences into these two irreconcilable things.
Mm-hmm. And before I give an example, because I think I'll just offer up again, and I mentioned it, and I'll offer up an example of a air quotes political system that functions in no way, shape, or form like anything that represents what we currently have, just so people can know something. Because like I said, you can go read books, articles, scholarly things, but I can just here on the podcast offer you an example of something that I'm personally a part of, that I participate in, that nothing's perfect in the sense of it can always be evolved and changed, but it's functioning, it serves its purpose, and it doesn't create any division. And the process, I think, if anyone were to take me at face value or participate in the process themselves, they would unequivocally agree that it stands in stark contrast to our current political system. So before I get into that, what I want to say about the thought experiment and about how politics is really just an ideology or representations of ideologies, and politics isn't a thing in of itself. The real thing is the thoughts and beliefs behind it. The biggest thought and belief that needs to be changed, or that needs to be realized in the minds and hearts of Americans and honestly people across the world, or if we really want to see true change and something that's representative of all people and serves us all equally, or serves us all justly, I would say, rather than equally, is the fact that we live in an ever-evolving global civilization, and until we become less selfish and truly, in our minds and hearts, start to see ourselves as family, literally, it sounds like really like, idealistic and naive, but the fact of the reality is it's the only thing that can possibly solve the problems that we have. Because let me just give you an example of taxes, right? Everyone wants to talk about taxes, right? Really, regardless of what you fall, right? Let's say if my family, right? If someone said, Armand, you are going to get we're going to take $5 out of your check, right? Or, we're going to take X amount of money out of your check every month, but we're going to do it so your cousin or your nephew or your sister, your brother, to make sure that they're okay and there's systems in place to take care of them if they're disadvantaged or if they have a mental illness or whatever the situation may be. If they're my family and I love them, by all means, take it. And if I can have trust in the system that's going to do that and allocate those funds properly and not have a misuse of those funds, or I can't really see exactly where my money's going and the effect that it's having, of course I'm going to do it 100%. So likewise, if you take that idea and you apply it to society at large, if you have to be taxed in order for someone else's life to be improved, you have to be okay with that. You have to believe in that wholeheartedly in order for you to not have any feelings of contempt in your heart about that happening, right? So just right there, you think about taxes. Oh, that's a political thing. It's not a political thing. It's a ideological thing. Do you agree with that? It's a you can say an ethical or a moral thing. It's more of a moral, ethical, and ideological thing than it is a political thing, because again, politics isn't a thing in of itself. Those politics are a result of those ideological, moral, and ethical things. So until we start to care about the well-being of society as a whole, as opposed to just, just my friends and my family or, my circle, if that's all you care about, then everything you dislike about the current political process is going to, you're ensuring that it's going to stay, because the only true remedy is that recognition of us being a family and us being in this thing together. You can't have, if you look at, the human civilization as a body, you can't have a body at war with itself and expect the body to function properly, right? You can't have your immune system attacking all your other organs and think things are going to work out, right? You can't have your hand trying to, smack you in the face all day long if you're trying to drive down the street, if you don't have control of your hand, right? Your body has to work in harmony in order for it to function. Likewise, humanity has to work in harmony in order for it to function. And in order for us to work in harmony, the prerequisite is to see ourselves as a family and to care about your fellow human being and about their prosperity and their success just as much as you do about your own and your own family. Professor Howard and Jason, you guys mentioned it earlier. If when you're talking about small government, whatever, like, if it affects me and the people that I love and that I can relate to, then I like this policy, regardless if it's Democratic or Republican or whatever it may be, right? But then if it doesn't affect me, or especially if it can affect me negatively in any way, even if it helps someone else, oh no, forget that. I don't want that. As long as that attitude's there, we're doomed. It doesn't matter what we talk about, and that's why, like, I'm not gonna get lost in this. Us versus. It's like, until we talk about changing, because I think changing the system and getting rid of this two-party system is the first step in us. It's like the baby step in the direction towards seeing us as a family, because, all right, you're kind of taking away this team ideology, this tribalism ideology, this us versus them ideology, and you're more starting from the, okay, it's not us versus them. Okay, I'm just a human being with my own volition and my own will. Okay, like, who do I want to vote for, irrespective of like what team they're on, right? So that's what it is for me. Like, that's the most important thing, right? I mean, I'll just give you another example, right? When it talks about a thought, right? Right now, we live in this world and we spend a certain amount of money on certain things, right? I don't want to say certain things, right? But let's say we have a budget and I will actually, because let's say we have a budget, like we're spending X amount of dollars on the military, right? In an ideal world, I still think that militaries will exist, not in any way, shape, or form like you think they currently exist. I think that in an ideal world, you will have governments that have arms, but the only time that you would act is if in unison, is if one nation takes up arms against another, and especially unjustly, then all the other nations act in union to stop that threat, right? So even in an ideal world, I still think there will be arms, right? But as we currently stand, I don't believe in the military-industrial complex as it currently stands, or war as it's currently, presented. So, here's a thought. If we take, it's like a thought about unity, right? So, and this is more like outside of just United States politics. This is thinking more about the world, because just like I think America has to see itself as one. So much of our politics in the U.S. is affected by global relations and global politics as well. The world has to see itself as one. So, world auxiliary language. If the United States government took X amount of money from this department, that's that has too much money. That's over budgeted is not a word, but there's too much money and resources being dedicated to this. If you take half, 20%, whatever, a substantial portion, and apply it to okay, let's see if we can draft some type of agreement where all the nations put X amount of money towards developing a world auxiliary language. So when the people of the world go to travel, we can all be united by our sense of language. We know how powerful language is. We know that when it comes to culture and family, like you're united by that common tongue, right? Can you imagine if there was a universal language, the whole world? I mean, I know Esperanto was, and it could be Esperanto. To me, it doesn't really matter if it's Esperanto or a new language that we come up with. But that if you went to China, if you went to Nigeria, if you went to Argentina, if you went to Germany, if you went to Australia, right? If you went to Japan, and we all could speak the same language, that's just a thought. But if enough people see the value and the beauty in that thought, then it becomes a air quotes political thing. Because now the way to see that thought manifest into reality is through politics, right? So now I'll just share the political process that I'm a part of. So again, in the last conversation, we talked about the Baha'i faith. And again, that's why I'm apolitical, because the Baha'i faith doesn't believe in partisan politics. I'm not even allowed, if I personally wanted to run for office. I can participate and do my civic duty by voting for people, but I vote based off my own volition. Who do I think kind of like, and this was what it's been pretty much my entire life, is the lesser of two evils. Primarily because too, regardless if you're a conservative or a progressive, if you're in love with, whoever your candidate is that you love in your heart, I think that every single candidate, no matter how good or bad they are in the public eye, is, my honest gut belief, is a worse version of themselves in politics than if they were to take the energy and spirit and their desire for change and apply it to some other facet of life to bring about change. I truly in my heart believe that. So, forgot what I just brought that up, but okay, going back to the thing that I take part in. Oh, that's why, because I was saying I wasn't partisan growing up, or whatever. The Baha'i faith, right? So that's why I can't run for government. That's why I'm not partisan. But we have a administrative and political body, if you will, that helps govern the Baha'i community's affairs on both a local, national, and international level. And there's a democratic process by which we elect these people to represent our communities. And this is how it goes. There's no parties, obviously, whatsoever. And there's no kind of like, again, I really appreciate your parents, Jason, your parents, Professor Howard, and my mom and grandma as well, for not really being political and talking about, their political affiliation, and just instilling the belief that you need to independently investigate who you want to vote for yourself. So there's no parties, and all it genuinely is you are a part of the Baha'i community. And when it comes time to vote for the local spiritual assembly, which will govern the affairs of the local Baha'i community. So, when I was living in California, it was the Pasadena or the Altadena area. When I was living in Washington, it was the Vancouver area. When I was living in Tampa, it's the Tampa area, right? You vote for whomever you believe has spiritual qualities that whoever you think has the spiritual qualities in them to help govern the affairs of the Baha'i community, and is really representative of the type of person you think can selflessly serve the community. That's the other thing. We don't really view these things as positions of power. They're positions of service, right? So when it comes time to vote, I don't talk about my vote. I'm not with anyone. You keep your vote to yourself. You're not supposed to talk about it, right? You don't talk to anyone about your vote. I don't say, hey, Jason, man, I think I'm going to vote for Professor Hawkins. No. Jason doesn't need to be here who I'm voting for. Why? What's the purpose? Jason is his own man, and he's going to decide who he wants to vote for himself. He's going to do the same process that I am in my mind, of making observations, being reflective about that process, and casting my vote, right? It's all said and done. You count up the ballots. Whatever 9 men or women in that community got the most votes is in. Simple, peasy, easy squeezy. And when they're elected, there is no they're elected, and you trust the process, and now those people represent you. And I think the other thing that I think about that process is completely different is you actually know the people that you're putting in office, which is something else I think needs to be a part of politics. Obviously, it's much harder when you're doing with that, when you're dealing with more people. Obviously, the Baha'i community is way smaller than actual like city or with the community, that has a mayor or a governor or whatever that represents them. But I think actually knowing who you're voting for is completely different than not truly knowing who you're voting for. So those people that are elected onto the local spiritual assembly, they come together and they cast their ballots, so all the local spiritual assemblies in the United States, they cast, which were democratically and privately elected by the Baha'i concentrics of the area. Then they go and they cast their ballot for the National Spiritual Assembly. And then those 9 people are elected. And then all the national spiritual assemblies of the world, so the Baha'is of the United States, the Baha'is of Chile, the Baha'is of Uganda, the Baha'is, of Armenia, the Baha'is of New Zealand, the Baha'is of wherever, they get together and all those national spiritual assemblies vote for the 9 members of the Universal House of Justice. And then, boom, that's the people that govern the world Baha'i affairs, right? And it's just like participating in that process is like night and day than participating in this current process, So, I'll just leave that there and for people to think about and reflect on, just for the sake of offering an alternative perspective, because I think sometimes just hearing an alternative, regardless of whatever your views may end up being on it, is just nice to hear, because then you have something to weigh your current, whatever the status quo is, your current thing against. Now you can see the current thing, I think, in a better light by having something else that you can compare and contrast it to. So I don't know if your mic got fixed yet, Jason, or what was happening, if you're back with us. If so, then maybe you can, if you have any thoughts. And then if you're not back with us, then I guess Tim or Professor Howard can go.
Yeah, looks like, unfortunate there. Yeah, I will add that it's very important for us to understand that we gotta, and Armand mentioned this in reference to community and having that fundamental understanding, second nature, that we're all in this together. Whatever decisions and movements we make collectively, that thought always has to be in that decision making process, behind the observations, behind the interpretations, that we have to include everyone. How is this solution going to look like representing John, Sam, Sally's interest? How can we do that? As long as we have that in mind, I think we're in the right step, if not a step ahead of the game, as far as making effective positive change globally. So it's very important that when we identify issues and mindsets, beliefs, and ideologies that we may interpret as erroneous, lacking, what I'm saying, and inclusiveness, whatever it is, at the end of the day, whatever messages you have alone, this doesn't amount to nothing unless we're there, we grab each other's hands, and we're sitting down and we discuss it in a conversation. I feel that is important too, that information becomes very real in people's lives. In order for that to happen, we very much have to have whatever ideas we come up with just as involved as, hanging out at the beach together, in our most vulnerable moments with each other, whether we're holding each other as each other crying, whatever it is, we have to be involved in each other's lives if we want messages, ideas, solutions, to actually not only come to fruition, but also to be effective. Because people not only have to be informed, but they have to believe that this works. What I'm saying, for them, and that it works for everyone. So again, any opportunity to have a conversation about it with someone else, it's so important that we, in my opinion, prioritize information, as like the top, one of the top most goals as far as, dissemination, the right information, getting out to people, making sure proper information, everyone's well informed and stuff, whatever solutions and movements we go forward with that. I think that'll be important in that multifaceted process going forward. But yeah, I think everyone shared a lot of good ideas. In my opinion, they're all great mindsets to have, great ideologies and stuff. I just hope that we can bring this conversation more and more to everyone in everyone's lives.
So I just hung up the phone with Jason. The techno gods came and snatched his soul, so he's not with us anymore. So that being said, I guess I can pass the ball to Professor Howard if he had anything to add to what either Tim or myself said, or just anything in general that has came to his mind since he's last spoke. And Professor Howard, I don't know if you noticed, but your mic is muted if you are trying to speak right now.
Yeah.
Am I good now?
Yeah, Tim, yes, who are you saying right to? Myself?
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same thing.
Just okay, I got you.
He was muted.
All right, go ahead, Professor.
Sorry, guys. So just two things when you were talking. I think changing the system and like revolution. I'm vehemently for it. Vehemently for that. I think of course, my view is the system as currently constructed doesn't work, won't work. It's kind of like it's like we have a car right now and the transmission's bad and the engine is bad, but we keep putting new tires on it and praying that the car is going to get better, right? It's going to run better now. It's this, the way it's currently constructed is not sustainable. I think one of the things that would need to be addressed even before we even start, I think that the first thing we have to address in our society is race.
20 acres and a mule? No, I'm joking. Go ahead.
The first thing we would have to address is race. And I think, the solution you talked about, Armand, is, that idea, I think, can be implemented. But I think as long as we hold on to our current notions of race, it won't, because we still, even in 2020, see people as other. They don't look like me, or that benefits them over there, and they don't look like us. And I think that our history of race in this country, even race is political, right? There's no such thing as biological race. We had politicians sit down and say, well, what is whiteness? And let's put that into law to see who's legally white. And based on who's legally white, those people are citizens, and those people will get the benefits of our government or receive the benefits of certain policies. And so that race thing, for me, not to always make it about race, but it's always about race at the same time, is
sorry. I just want to say, it's just so funny to me, because it's like, obviously people say, why is everything about race? Like, this, literally think about it. This whole country started about race. Like, what do you mean everything's about race and it hasn't been solved? So until it's figured, right. It's like, I'm sorry.
And not only like, and no, thank you. And not only has it not been solved, we don't even want to acknowledge it, right? And I think that's the for me as a person of color, that is the frustrating part, is that it's not being solved, and we're not, like, we don't want to address it. It can't be acknowledged. It can't be addressed. If or if it is, it's. And this is kind of the backlash of an Obama presidency is, well, that was back then, but we have a black president, so it can't be that bad now, can it? And you get those kind of like facetious comments, and like you said, it really is. It really is. And I think just last thing I'll say just about our current system overall, and I thought,
sorry, one more thing, and I'll say this again. This isn't a political statement. I'm just calling a spade. When Barack was president, and we all know who started the movement, but when Barack was president, and again, I'm not having a political conversation, I'm having a race conversation. When everyone's like, oh, where you're born, show us your birth certificate. What was that about? What is that about? Like, what reason do you have to think that the guy wasn't born in America? Like, what's the angle? What was the motivation? And please, whoever's listening out there in the world, tell me what it's about. If it's not about race, then I would really like to know what that was about. But go ahead.
Exactly. right? And I just think I think the last issue that when we come up with our new system, and I think Tim said, just going back, we have these things like we talking about our Constitution. We hold on to it, but this is a document that was written for a
People
late
circle jerk to it more accurately.
yeah, but it was those specific people drew it up for a late 18th century society, right? And so like half the first 10 amendments, like the Second Amendment, we didn't have an army then, so yeah, you might want a gun if the English came invading again. But now we have the most powerful military in the world. Like, these things are irrelevant, but they are like hot button political issues in our society, right? And I think even I mentioned like voting on Tuesday was one thing that was implemented to accommodate like an agricultural society, and when the market was open and when people came back home and all that other stuff. And it's just so many things that like we're just scared to touch. We're scared to tinker with. We're scared to revamp and revitalize, or
Yeah,
like
we don't trust ourselves to do it. It is fear. Yep, continue.
exactly, right? It's just like, well, they said it, and and again, Armand, bring it back to race, like not about race, but it is about race. But we treat these founding fathers like they're gods. They didn't do anything wrong.
People always like, yeah, my forefathers. Whose forefathers? Not mine, bruh.
Not mine. Those ones, those guys that wrote it, right? America treats them, in American history, treats them like they're God. They never made a mistake. They never
like
did
deities. Seriously, like deities.
Right. So this Constitution that they wrote is perfect, right? These decisions that they made for as legislation is perfect. And in 2020, we cannot touch that perfection because we're imperfect and because we're mere mortals, right? And that's the attitude that we have. And it hinders us to progress, like you guys are saying, because we are anchored to this idea that, we can't change this because then, we don't know what's next. Well, we have some very intelligent people in the world, right? And when they wrote their document, did they know it was? Did they think about it as highly as we do? Maybe, maybe not, right? And so those are some of the things that really, bothered me about our current political system. Is we want to change things, and the people that say they want to change things, we can only go so far and change them. Because when you start saying things like, all right, let's rewrite the Constitution, then, oh, wait, we can't do that. Like, wait, why not? Right? Because people that look like me, I was 3/5 of a person in that document. So I don't really see the validity in it in 2020. If you are saying I am a full human being now, if that's what you're telling me, why don't we put this on paper? And I'm not talking about an amendment that abolishes slavery and gives me rights and then creates a loophole for
prison systems.
Prison labor, right? We're not talking about that. I'm talking about everybody, like you're kind of saying, Armand, everybody, we're all one. We're not even different races. We're just humans. And let's write a document that reflects that and gives equal opportunity and equity to that oneness of our humanity. And again, I don't think because even when we think about like a Bernie Sanders or an AOC, the ideas that they talk about, I'm like, hey, I mean, that's cool. I mean, I would go even a little further than what they're talking about. But then you hear like, oh, they're radical. They don't fit in our system. And it's like, the thing that they're talking about is like basic human rights. Like, if you're sick, you should be able to go see a doctor without paying $12,000 because, you broke your wrist or whatever the case may be. Or transitioning, we have this climate change, transitioning out of carbon emissions to more of a green. Oh, that's radical. Like, really? And it's a bunch of people in our political system right now. They are above average age. I don't want to call them old, but they're above average age. And the decisions that they're making, such as, the ones concerning climate change, and a lot of the decisions that they're making, even with Supreme Court judges and whatnot, they're selecting things that we're going to have to live with for generations into the future. Like I was telling somebody about Trump, and I'm like, he's going to be dead in the next 10, 15 years. Not to wish anything bad upon him, but he's 74. The average life expectancy in America for a male, I think, is 78. So he's knocking on the doorstep, and I know he's rich, so we're going to increase that to about another 10 years, making 89. That's, what I mean? But he's making decisions that are going to impact us for generations. And the people that are combating those decisions, they're too radical, right? We can't do that because that's just too much. And it just, like you said, in the current constraints of the system, we are not, and I'm not saying this just to be pessimistic, we're not going to see true change, right? We're not going to see
we're
that.
not. We're not. Yeah. So that being said, can leave it open to any final thoughts. Jason, again, Techno Gods came and took him away, so I'll go ahead and I'll do my best. Southwest J, Cali Kid, fresh impersonation. But Tim, Professor Howard, you guys have any final thoughts?
No, that was my final thought.
Jason? I mean, Tim.
Yeah. You know, same sentiments. That's basically what I basically, I think we basically got it because you guys encapsulated a lot of points that I would have expressed really eloquently, really good. Just emphasize the importance of being more involved in each other's lives. When 1990, during an event called the Capitol Crawl, where like 1,000 or so disability activists got together in the Capitol and in front of live TV crawled up the steps to show the world, to force them to look at the reality of, what it's like living with a limitation, to help pass the Americans with Disabilities Act. The key was bringing in, with the help of technology, people in closer, into their lives. I feel like that's an important element when it comes to any sort of progress or change, because ultimately, you know, things are much better when the human to human connection is much stronger. I feel like you can only do that by getting more involved in people's lives, other than a horrible system and representing people's needs and wants and ideas. I think what's missing is, these leaders or representatives being more involved in people's lives. No matter how good your ideal is, it will never match the combination of what you have as far as making the system better and knowing somebody and the people you're representing on a intimate, frequent, person to person level. And I just think that's super important. So any chance our listeners get in having a conversation with somebody, especially somebody outside your social circle, do it. You know what I'm saying? Spend time with them. You have great ideas, you have messages, but spend time with them. Let the people know that outside of your idea, that you care about them and that you intimately know, what I'm saying, that you just simply care about them, and that harks back to love and harks back to community. So in a world where we're getting increasingly smaller and smaller and smaller, because we're constantly growing and we're becoming numerous, it really helps to bridge the gap if we bring back the person to person conversations and interactions socially, kind of shoving texting and emailing aside and picking up our phones often and just engaging in socialization with each other, more personally. But yeah, that's it. That's all.
Sure that. So I'll go ahead and, I'll say goodbye for Jason. So thank you everyone for listening today and really tuning in and listening to us talk. Appreciate you guys joining us and being a part of the circle. Just want to say that, it's never about just any one of us as individuals. It's about learning and growing all together. And with that, I wish everybody well, and until next time. And for myself, thank you guys for tuning in once again. My final thoughts on the conversation, honestly, is just, if you do what you always do, you're going to get what you always get. I think that at the end of the day, there's more that unites us than that sets us apart. We have to start fundamentally changing the way we think in regard to so many things, but politics is one of them. And if we truly want our own voices to be heard and for our needs to be met, we need to ensure that that sentiment is true for everyone and get rid of this idea of this, us versus them, this two-party system, this separatism. At the end of the day, we're all creatures of God. If you don't believe in God, we're all creatures of the universe. And ultimately, most people want the same thing out of life. They just want love, happiness, be with their family, and just to have general prosperity. So, in some cases, in some regards, our problems are complex and nuanced and intricate, but at the same time, they're also pretty simple. I think, the idea, the identifying of our problems is, to me, quite simple, but their resolution may be complex and intricate. But let's identify it, and let's make efforts to eradicate these things. So, anyways, that's it for me. Thank you guys for listening, and until next time,
Much
peace.
love, people. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Be in good health.